I lifted the sealed pasteboard, and underneath was my correctly spelled name.
She was 18 and alone. No family, no corrected birth certificate, no room after Friday, just a canvas bag and $1 she had kept beneath her shoe lining. And with that dollar, she bought a forgotten paper bookplate gumming room in Northampton, Hampshire County, Massachusetts, absent from tax maps since 1986. The north sill had separated from the brickwork. Rain had opened a black seam through the roof. The county condemned it on October 6, 2022, with demolition scheduled for the following spring. Yet beneath its drying string frame waited a paper-wrapped pasteboard, unopened for 47 years, holding library envelopes, her true name, and a letter asking for her return. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Ivy Clarke had been waiting her whole life without knowing it. Her childhood moved through western Massachusetts in labeled plastic tubs. At each foster house, an adult wrote her name in marker. At each departure, someone crossed out an address. Her birth certificate traveled with her, its middle name typed as Claire, corrected by hand to Claire, then questioned in red ink. Ivy answered to either spelling and kept important paper flat against cardboard. She remembered her mother less as a face than as two careful hands. Once, those hands had spread warm paste across a printed label with the rounded edge of a bone knife, working from the center outward. Then her mother held the paper to the light to show that not one wet ridge remained. Years later, at a temporary home in Greenfield, Ivy met Marion Clarke, a retired bindery worker with the same surname, but no relation anyone could prove. Marion came each Saturday in a camel-colored coat with one black button sewn on in brown thread. From a biscuit tin, she took discarded book plates, copperplate urns, ships, owls beneath Latin ribbons. At the kitchen table, she taught Ivy to warm equal parts dextrin and water, let the foam settle, and test the paste on waste paper. They brushed each back, laid it gum side upward, then stretched cotton thread between two chairs for drying. In damp weather, Marion shortened the hanging time. In cold weather, she warmed the bone folder in her palm. The ritual lasted 11 months, long enough for Ivy's hands to remember. Paper tells you how much pressure it can bear. Marion said it once, after Ivy tore a plate by hurrying. The lesson was about listening through the fingers, but Ivy carried it into every silent room afterward. Marion died during a February ice storm. 2 weeks after pneumonia put her in Franklin Medical Center. The biscuit tin, bone folder, and small copper saucepan were listed as household effects, then lost when the county cleared her apartment. Ivy received only the black button, clipped from the coat by a nurse who understood that a modest object could still be an inheritance. Her final guardian, Vera Bell, kept a house so controlled that even the furnace seemed to breathe by permission. Mail entered through a brass slot and disappeared into Vera's locked roll-top desk. Ivy signed support forms wherever a blue pencil mark had been made. Questions about the payments earned only the alignment of a sugar bowl or the tightening of a curtain cord. Twice Ivy saw envelopes addressed in narrow blue handwriting beneath Vera's ledger. Vera turned them face down and said the agency handled family correspondence. After that, the drawer stayed locked. On November 4th, 2022, Ivy returned from washing bakery trays and found her canvas bag beside the umbrella jar. Marion's black button lay on top, still threaded to its square of camel-colored wool. Vera watched as Ivy found 2 shirts, socks, the disputed birth certificate, and none of the letters from the desk. "You are 18 now. This house owes nothing." Vera held out the bag without crossing the waxed floor. Behind her, the desk was closed. Ivy looked at her mother's faint signature beneath the corrections. Whatever that silence meant, The paper would not explain it. She tucked the button inside her shoe and walked out while Vera turned the deadbolt with deliberate care. For 6 weeks, Ivy measured distance by where she could close her eyes. In Greenfield, she slept 2 nights in the bus station until a guard began checking tickets. She had $73.40. She rode to Holyoke, paid $12 for laundry and a shower, then spent 4 nights upright beside a dryer that rattled every 11 minutes. In Springfield, the stone portico of a closed parish hall taught her that cardboard kept November cold from entering through her coat. Her money fell to $38, then $21. She ate oatmeal from a pharmacy where hot water was free and repaired a stranger's backpack for $5. Rain pushed her into a Northampton parking garage stairwell, her birth certificate held inside her shirt. By the 6th Monday, she had $14.82, the bag, and Marion's button. At the Springfield City Library, she went in to warm her hands. On a corkboard near the local history room, beneath notices for piano lessons and winter tires, a county advertisement curled from one brass tack. Sealed municipal disposal. Paper bookplate gumming room, Northampton. Structure only. $1 consideration. The buyer accepted every repair and risk. Demolition review would begin. March 1st, Ivy copied the parcel number onto a discarded checkout slip. The word bookplate held her fingers still. She found that morning bus in the clerk's office hours. $1 would buy no safety she could trust, but it might buy a locked door whose key belonged to her. At dawn, Ivy boarded for Northampton with $13.82, a black button under her heel, and Marion's pressure lesson alive in both hands. The bus carried Ivy north through sleet until a fallen maple stopped traffic near Holyoke. With service suspended overnight, she walked 6.5 miles along Route 5, keeping beyond the shoulder line whenever headlights approached. Darkness found her beside an empty hay barn near Mount Tom. She entered through a partly open door, climbed to the loft, and slept in old Timothy hay while mice worked beneath the boards. At dawn, after another 3 miles on foot, a farm supply thermometer read 19 degrees. Her breath had frozen along her sleeve. A driver told her buses were moving again. By 10, a replacement coach entered Northampton past Hotel Northampton, Thorne's Marketplace, Broadside Bookshop, A2Z Science and Learning, and Joe's Pizza. Delivery doors released coffee and warm yeast into the cold. Ivy had one office to reach before noon. The Hampshire County Clerk occupied a narrow annex beside the Registry of Deeds. Behind the counter sat a woman with jaw-length silver hair and red glasses on a beaded chain. Her brass nameplate read, Margaret Ellis, Deputy Clerk. Ivy placed the checkout slip and her birth certificate beneath the opening in the glass. Margaret read the parcel number, then studied Ivy over the rims of her glasses. You understand, the building has no occupancy permit. Yes, ma'am. You understand the city will provide no repairs. Yes, ma'am. You understand? Unpaid taxes follow the deed. Yes, ma'am. You understand condemnation can still proceed in March. Yes, ma'am. Margaret kept one finger on the form. Then, I need the consideration. Ivy pulled the softened dollar from her shoe lining. Margaret smoothed it, entered its serial number in a receipt book, and marked 3 signature lines. Ivy wrote Ivy Claire Clarke as it appeared on the corrected certificate. The clerk pressed a square brass stamp against the deed. It landed with a patient metal thump. Her directions were exact. Leave by Gothic Street, turn north on King, continue 2 8/10 miles. Take the gravel lane after the abandoned rail spur, then walk 400 yards beyond the second walnut tree. When she reached the signature line again, her hand stopped. Clarke, she said. Did Marion Clarke send you? Ivy felt the button beneath her heel. She died last February. Margaret removed her glasses. In 1989, Marion had come to this counter with a biscuit tin, asking who held the gumming room lien. She had worked there, beside Edwin Clarke, before the trade closed. Each January afterward, she paid a preservation fee and filed an objection to demolition. The last payment had arrived 11 months ago in an envelope smelling faintly of paste. "She never told me," Ivy said. "She may have been waiting for a fact she could prove." Margaret studied the altered name. The county couldn't prove it either, but she kept the building on the list. Margaret produced an iron key tagged Parcel 17441. The dollar remained beneath the brass clip of her receipt book. King Street narrowed past auto shops and bare lots before the gravel lane bent toward the old rail bed. Beside a white house, a woman in a quilted blue coat pruned an apple tree. Her brindled dog came to the fence and gave one low bark. "You looking for the paste room?" the woman asked. Ivy nodded. "Doris Vale. That's Otis. He respects a gate." She pointed with her pruning saw. "Follow the walnuts." The last tree leans toward the chimney. Beyond 5 black walnut trees stood a one-story workshop of red brick and smoke-darkened timber, 28 feet wide and 42 feet long. Broken asphalt shingles covered a roof sagging along its northern third. The rear chimney lacked a cap, and 2 brick courses leaned outward. Over the doors, 4 words remained: Clarke Bookplate Gumming Works. Ivy stood beneath the sign until cold reached through the soles of her shoes. Marion had never said the room bore her name. The key resisted twice before the lock turned. One door opened 6 inches against fallen plaster. Ivy entered sideways, grit rolling beneath her palm. The air tasted of old starch and wet brick, while water tapped into a metal pan overhead. The front room held a scarred packing table, shelves bound with twine, and a coal stove with its door open. Oiled paper covered the windows, amber in daylight and black with mildew. Dust felt soft as flour over cold maple. A broken pane admitted the smell of snow and walnut hulls. The back room, sheltered by the chimney, felt warmer. Dried paste cracked into pale islands inside a zinc-lined trough, releasing the sweet scent of Marion's saucepan when Ivy lifted one edge. Above it hung the drying string frame, its cotton lines slack but unbroken. Beneath the frame, a brown-papered pasteboard was fixed down with 4 dark screws. She tested one corner and stopped when it did not move. Light failed early. She cleared the doorway, covered the broken pane with a shelf plank, and swept one rectangle of floor using dry grass. Cold oatmeal tasted of paper and the metal spoon she had carried from Springfield. Ivy lay on flattened packing sheets with the bag beneath her head and the deed inside her shirt. Wind pressed the oiled windows inward, then released them with a papery breath. When the building settled, she placed one hand on the floor and listened through her palm. Near midnight, something beneath the drying frame answered the wind with one dense wooden knock. What was kept carefully could still find its way home. Morning put light through the broken pane. Ivy left the pasteboard untouched and spent 3 days making the room survivable. She primed this hand pump well with melted snow until brown water cleared. The outhouse beyond the 5th walnut had a sound door but daylight through its roof. Inside, the front threshold squealed. 2 boards beside the stove clicked, and the plank before the drying frame made no sound. On the 4th morning, she carried the parcel deed to Mercer's Hardware on Pleasant Street. The shop smelled of pine handles, fertilizer, and the oil Wade Mercer used on every hinge. Wade was a broad man, near 60, with the left lens of his glasses permanently frosted by a web of scratches. He read the condemnation notice, folded it once, and asked how much money she had. $12.82. That won't make a chimney safe. No. Can you work Saturdays until the debt is even? Yes. Wade opened a ledger beneath the register and wrote, Clarke Gumming Room, on a fresh line. He charged a 6-inch chimney brush at $7, a small pry bar at $9.80, masonry screws at $4.25, stove cement at $6.40, and a kerosene lantern at $8.75. Then he added a dog-eared copy of Home Repair for New England Buildings and marked it, "No charge. Return what survives," he said. "Pay for what doesn't." The chimney took 5 hours. Ivy spread the least torn packing sheets around the stove, removed the rusted baffle, and taped a feed sack across the firebox opening, leaving a slit for the fiberglass rods. Working from below, she drove the round wire brush upward 1 3-foot section at a time, turning clockwise so the couplings would not loosen. Dry flakes descended first. Then a glazed plate of creosote struck the sack hard enough to raise black dust through the room. She repeated each section until the brush moved without scraping and collected 11 pounds of soot and scale. At dusk, she checked the flue with a mirror and lantern, sealed a hairline joint in the stovepipe, and waited 2 hours for the cement to skin. The first fire began with 3 newspaper twists, cedar splinters from a broken shelf, and 2 pieces of seasoned maple Wade had tied to her cart. Smoke rose cleanly past the chimney top. Ivy set a dented saucepan on the stove and warmed 2 potatoes, half an onion, and salt in well water. Steam touched her face. She ate beside the fire, slowly enough to feel each mouthful become heat. Only then did she inventory the back room. She chose what deserved to be handled and left the rest in dust. The zinc paste trough, a copper dextrin kettle green at its rivets, 4 bone knives in a slotted rack, a hard rubber brayer, a brass humidity gauge reading 31%, 2 bundles of blank Japanese paper, a drawer of engraved book plates, and the overhead drying frame. Each object had been positioned for a right-handed worker. Marion had been left-handed. Ivy used the bone folder to tap the floor in a measured grid. Pine answered with a light, open note from the chimney to the trough. Beneath the brown-papered pasteboard, the sound shortened to a dense knock. She marked the border in chalk, then slid the pry bar under its south edge. The board rose less than an inch before its weight stopped her. It was too heavy for layered paper and too balanced to be water damage. 4 screw heads lay beneath circles of brown wax. Ivy warmed each circle between her fingers, lifted the wax, and backed out the screws without stripping them. At the center of the board, almost hidden by paste stains, she found a cedar disc no wider than a quarter. Its face had been carved with an owl standing above an open book, the same device printed on one of Marion's Saturday book plates. The disc turned 1/8 of a revolution. A wooden latch released below. Ivy raised the board with a loop of the drying cord and rested it against the frame. Beneath it was a compartment lined with zinc, shallow enough to escape the damp soil below the floor. Brown paper packages lay inside, separated by cedar strips. No dust covered them. The trapped air carried dextrine, dry wood, and the faint medicinal trace of camphor. She lifted the first package with both hands and opened its folded seams instead of tearing them. Inside lay 2 ivory bone folders, an agate burnisher in a wool sleeve, a narrow paste brush bound in brass, and the small copper saucepan missing from Marion's apartment. The handle bore a dark crescent where Marion's thumb had rested. The second parcel contained raw materials, sealed cakes of potato dextrin, 6 sheets of kozo paper, linen thread, and 3 copper printing plates wrapped in tissue. One plate showed the owl and open book. Another carried a name in reversed lettering. Ivy held it toward the lantern until she could read the letters in the mirror of the copper. Ivy Claire Clarke. She sat back on her heels. Claire, no second I, no correction mark. Beneath the plates rested a tied stack of finished book plates bearing the same name. The paper was older than she was, its deckled edges still pale beneath the tissue. On the first plate, a small line had been added below the owl. Daughter of Eliza Marion Clarke. Ivy touched only the blank margin. The final object was a blue steel document box. Its lock had not been fastened. Inside, library envelopes stood upright by denomination, each sealed with a strip of gummed bookplate paper. Ivy arranged them on the floor and opened one at a time with the bone knife. The paper money was dry, flat, and grouped in counted bands. When she added the penciled totals twice, the amount was exactly $33,000. A smaller velvet pouch held 4 kinds of coins apart from the cash: Liberty Head gold dollars, $5 half eagles, Morgan silver dollars, and worn Indian head cents. Ivy placed them in rows without cleaning them. Under the pouch lay a tarnished Purple Heart engraved Edwin A. Clarke and dated 1944. Its purple enamel caught the lantern flame, then went dark when she lowered it. At the bottom of the box were 3 cream library envelopes. One held Marion's preservation receipts. One held a certified application requesting that Ivy's birth record be corrected to Claire. The third bore Ivy's full name in the narrow blue handwriting she had seen beneath Vera's ledger. Across its sealed flap, someone had written, "For my daughter, when no one can keep this from her." Ivy did not open it. She returned the cash, coins, metal, and documents to the steel box, but kept the letter on the packing table beneath Marion's black button. Then she carried the lantern outside. Snowmelt moved along the drainage ditch toward the Mill River, black water slipping beneath a skin of ice. She watched twigs enter the culvert and emerge on the other side, altered only by darkness and distance. The letter remained sealed when she came back inside. She placed one palm on the pasteboard, now leaning against the frame, and felt the cedar disc beneath her fingers. What was kept carefully could still find its way home. Morning entered through the oiled paper as a muted amber square. Ivy heated water, washed soot from her fingers, and placed the cream envelope beside the copper saucepan. The handwriting on its face leaned narrowly to the right. She had seen it beneath Vera's ledger, but also on Marion's labels for dextrin and linen thread. Only when those two memories joined did Ivy understand that they had always belonged to one hand. She opened the flap with Marion's bone knife. "My dear one, whoever you are, court officials withheld your current name and every delivery confirmation. Now I can write Ivy Claire Clarke. Claire is the spelling your father and I chose. Correction documentation accompanies this letter. You knew me as Marion, the Saturday Volunteer. My full name is Eliza Marion Clarke, your mother. After Dr. Lenora Price diagnosed pulmonary fibrosis at Cooley Dickinson Hospital in Northampton, I signed a temporary placement so you would have heat while I entered treatment. Temporary placement lengthened. Correspondence returned. Hearings proceeded unannounced. When Greenfield accepted me as a craft volunteer, I endured silence because it gave me 11 months beside you. I hoped my hands communicated the forbidden truth. 4 generations preceded you here. Abigail Clarke began gumming library plates in Northampton in 1898. Her daughter Ruth continued through the First World War and lost her brother Samuel in the Meuse Argonne fighting of 1918. Ruth's son Edwin returned from Europe in 1945 with the medal in this box. His daughter Eliza Marion learned beside him in 1968 and swept the floor when the trade closed on October 31st, 1975. 46 silent years followed. Silence is not emptiness. If you choose this work, mix equal measures of potato dextrin and water. Warm the water to 140 degrees, never boiling. Brush from the center outward. Then hang each plate 18 minutes near 45% humidity. When a corner rises, add no paste. rested beneath clean paper and a bone folder. The money came from our final library edition and Edwin's savings. Use it for the roof, corrected records, and enough learning time without hunger. Keep the remainder for whoever follows. Inheritance is not what rests inside a box. It is a level table, a brush washed before hardening, and the correct name written beyond anyone's erasure. Behind the back door stands a slate marker carved with the owl and EMC. Beneath it waits Ruth's brass spirit lamp. Light it once, if the wick survived. I asked to bring home, until asking shaped my days. If this reaches you after my death, believe you were sought. Even when every surrounding door said otherwise, the house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Eliza Marion Clarke. January 14th, 2022 Ivy read the letter twice. The second time she stopped at the sentence about Saturday's silence and laid her thumb over a small paste mark beside the word hands. She did not cry. She aligned the pages, folded them along their original creases, and returned them to the envelope, with the correction application behind them. Marion's black button remained on top. Through the back door, snow had gathered against the chimney foundation. Ivy cleared it with a broken board until her fingers struck slate. The marker stood knee-high, beneath winter weeds, its owl softened by weather, and the letters EMC still deep enough to hold ice. She worked around the base with the pry bar. 6 inches down, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a brass lamp no larger than a teacup, with a round reservoir and a hinged cap. Inside, she cleaned the burner threads with linen, trimmed the surviving wick to 1/8 of an inch, and filled the reservoir with a little kerosene from Wade's lantern tin. The striker failed, so she carried a cedar splint from the stove. Blue flame gathered beneath the brass crown, then steadied into gold. She set Marion's copper saucepan above it. For the first time since 1975, the old paste lamp warmed the room. The kindnesses came without arrangement. Margaret Ellis sent a certified copy of the name correction petition and waived the copying fee. Wade Mercer left a sound stovepipe collar beside the door, marked against her Saturday hours. Doris Vale brought brown bread and 2 boiled eggs in a paper bag, then walked away before Ivy could offer payment. Each person supplied one small thing the room could not yet supply for itself. Ivy wrote their names on the back page of Wade's repair manual. Beside each one, she recorded the object given, rather than its price, leaving enough blank space for whatever repayment honest work might someday allow. Before we move on, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they could not have known how badly you needed it. Was it a meal, a ride, a tool, or simply a door held open without questions? Tell us in the comments if you wish. Quiet help deserves to be remembered, even when the giver never learns what it repaired. That night, Ivy placed the copper saucepan, brass lamp, bone folders, and Marion's button. Beside her packing sheet bed, the letter rested inside her shirt, against the corrected name on her birth certificate. She slept while the lamp cooled, and the stove kept one red coal until morning. The first snow came December 2nd, 5 inches over the broken shingles. Ivy caught meltwater in pans and read Wade's roofing chapter 3 times. The slopes measured 32 by 46 feet. Allowing 10% for cuts, she calculated 16 squares of shingles, 5 rolls of 30-pound felt, and 48 pounds of galvanized nails. Wade delivered the order with a roofing hatchet worn bright along one cheek. It had belonged to his late brother Amos, and he placed it in Ivy's hand without adding it to the ledger. Ruth Calder, a 71-year-old former roofer with a white braid, inspected the north slope, named 3 unsafe rafters, and refused payment. "You can feed me when finished." They worked 11 days. Ivy sistered the weakest rafter with a straight 12-foot length of spruce, fastening it beyond the damaged section with carriage bolts. Ruth snapped a blue chalk line across each course and taught her to set a nail in 3 strokes: seat, drive, finish. When Ivy left one head above the shingle, Ruth touched it with one mitten. That nail's proud. Strike it again. Another bent beneath the felt. Pull it. The shank has bent. By December 15th, the last ridge cap overlapped the prevailing wind. Rain came that night. Ivy sat beneath the old leak with an empty pan and listened to water travel over the roof instead of through it. In the morning, she fed Ruth potato soup from Marion's copper saucepan. Along the chimney's western face, 6 bricks had spalled to their soft orange centers. Mortar powdered under Ivy's thumb, and the upper courses moved in January wind. She numbered each sound brick before dismantling the damaged section so it could return to its original bond. Wade found reclaimed brick in the old dimensions. Retired mason Leonard Shaw examined the mortar beneath a pocket magnifier. He advised 3 parts natural hydraulic lime to 1 part fire clay, mixed only as wet as packed snow. Portland cement, he said, would break the softer brick during frost. For 3 weeks, daytime temperatures remained between 22 and 29 degrees. Ivy warmed the sand indoors, carried small mortar batches to the scaffold, and covered each finished course with burlap before sunset. Gloves dulled her touch, so she worked barehanded while bedding the joints. Every 15 minutes her fingers went numb. She climbed down, held them near the stove without touching iron, and returned when she could feel the trowel's wooden handle. On January 27th, she removed the insulated cover and waited until afternoon. A test fire no larger than 2 fists burned for 1 hour. Then another piece of maple followed. Outside, smoke rose vertically from the rebuilt cap. Inside, the mirror at the cleanout stayed clear. The draw was quiet and complete. Beneath grime and paste, the front room floor was white pine fastened with hand-cut rose-head nails. Ivy drove every raised head below the surface with a narrow punch, marking the weakest boards in chalk. 2 had rotted beside the door. Wade found matching planks in the loft of a demolished mill, and Ivy cut their ends by hand, so the replacements landed at the centers of sound joists. She rented a random orbit sander for $14 per day. 80 grit removed soot and varnish, but left circles wherever she hurried. She slowed until the machine's weight worked. The second pass used 120 grit along the grain. The third, 220, left the pine smooth, without closing its pores. Around each nail she worked with folded paper. One morning she woke unable to lift the sander. Nothing was injured. Her hands simply stayed around the coffee cup while daylight crossed the packing table. Ivy walked to the Mill River marsh and watched a great blue heron stand in water, the color of lead. For 3 hours, it moved only twice. She did no work that day and did not call the day wasted. The next morning she vacuumed the floor, wiped it with mineral spirits, and applied the first of 3 thin coats of tung oil finish. Each coat entered the pine differently. After the third, the board shifted from dark honey toward mahogany around the stove, while the new planks remained quietly lighter. Ivy allowed a full 48-hour cure, stepping only on boards laid across the joists to reach the fire. Of 8 windows, 3 had no glass, 4 held cracked panes, and 1 contained a wavering sheet salvaged from a Northampton farmhouse built in 1788. Ivy preserved that pane. Its bubbles bent walnut branches into small rivers. The glass had survived more weather than anyone in the room. She removed each sash, labeled its weight pocket, and scraped failed putty without levering against glass. After setting glazier's points every 8 inches, she warmed DAP 33 between her palms, rolled narrow ropes, and pressed them into the rabbet. A clean knife drawn steadily formed a bevel sealing the edge while remaining below the interior sightline. 2 sash cords had become powder. Ivy replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord, feeding each length over the pulley and tying a figure 8 knot at the cast iron counterweight. The restored sash rose without tilting and remained wherever she placed it. She tested every meeting rail with a strip of paper before driving the stop beads home. On the final window, February light warmed the fresh putty to the color of cream. Ivy lifted the lower sash 6 inches and felt clean air move across the paste trough. A chickadee landed on the nearest walnut branch, its feet closing around a twig no thicker than linen cord. It looked through the restored glass while Ivy held the sash steady, then flew toward the river. Behind the loose wall surface, Ivy found horsehair plaster, gripping hand-split oak lath. Her first 3 patches near the chimney failed. 1 slumped, 1 cracked overnight, and 1 detached whole when the stove warmed the brick. Wade brought an old paper bag of clean horsehair from the hardware loft. She mixed it into lime plaster until each trowel cut exposed fine, dark strands. The 4th attempt began with a scratch coat pressed through the lath and scored horizontally. Over it she laid a rough 3/8-inch brown coat. She kept the stove low and misted it during a 72-hour cure. The 1/8-inch finish coat was feathered into the old wall with a damp brush. When it hardened, Ivy ran her palm across the join. These patches will hold another 100 years. She did not say it aloud. The wall did not require a promise, only the correct mixture and enough time. Doris Vale left paper bags on the doorstep each Tuesday. Her silver-framed glasses sat low on her nose, dusted with cafe flour. 1 bag held bean soup, another biscuits, another apples and cheese. When Ivy offered money, Doris pushed the coins back. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." Caleb Moss arrived on a red Schwinn with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 19, narrow-shouldered, and wore 1 boot with a strip of silver tape around the toe. Without asking, he split the maple rounds Wade had delivered and stacked them barkside upward beneath the roof overhang. Ivy offered him cash from the Saturday wages. "No," he said. "My mother said. About your grandfather." He touched the maul handle once, as if that completed the explanation, then rode back toward King Street. Reverend Boyd walked past each morning at 7:10. A deep crease crossed his brown felt hat where 2 fingers had pinched it for years. During the window work, he brought a bucket of clean rags. During the plastering, he carried away the broken lath. He never entered unless invited. At the gate, he tipped his hat and offered the same 4-word prayer. "Keep these hands steady." Ivy recorded each gift in the repair manual. Food, split wood, cotton cloth, carried debris. The column for prices remained empty. The cellar was postponed until February 11th when dry weather lowered the seepage. 7 granite steps descended to a 12 by 15-foot fieldstone floor. At its center lay a dressed granite slab, carved with the owl above an open book. Ivy tested it with the pry bar and left it. Some weight did not need moving because a lever existed. Under the 3rd step, her lantern showed 1 straight line among the rough stone. A small oak box had been wedged behind the riser and cushioned with wool. It contained a brass key whose bow formed the same owl and book symbol, along with a tintype dated 1903. The young woman in the picture stood outside the gumming room holding a bone folder against her apron. She had Ivy's level eyebrows, narrow chin, and the same uneven curve in her left ear. On the back, faded ink remained legible. Ruth Clarke, daughter of Abigail Clarke, age 25, summer of 1903. Ivy tried the key in the document box, the old desk, and both exterior doors. It fitted none. She hung it from a linen cord above the mantel, where the brass lamp illuminated its outline. She did not yet know what it opened. March loosened the snow from the north wall in gray shelves. The drainage ditch became a loud creek, carrying walnut shells and winter twigs toward the Mill River. By April, green catkins hung from the black walnuts, and the restored windows could remain open through the warmest part of the afternoon. Ivy decided not to begin the full craft that spring. A sound building was not the same as a trained hand. She would exchange 1 gold coin for paper, dextrin, brushes, and engraving lessons. Then practice on small samples that could be discarded without waste. Every morning she mixed only 2 spoonfuls of paste. Every evening she washed the brush, flattened the curled failures, and wrote the day's humidity beside them. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, on December 6, 2024, Ivy completed the first bookplate she was willing to keep. She had engraved Ruth Calder beneath a small roofline supported by an open book. The water reached 140 degrees. Equal measures of dextrin dissolved without foam. At 45% humidity, Ivy brushed from the center outward and hung the plate for 18 minutes. It dried without a ridge or lifted corner. She placed it inside Ruth's roofing manual, closed the cover beneath a bone folder, and waited. When the book opened again, the paper lay flat. The interior around her had become useful rather than polished. White pine floors held the darker path of earlier workers. Shelves stood square. The zinc trough shone only where hands touched it, and the 1788 pane still bent the walnut branches. Marion's copper saucepan rested above Ruth's brass lamp. The drying frame carried 12 cotton lines, each tightened to the same note. The key found its lock that autumn. Clearing dead ivy from the oldest walnut, Ivy uncovered a brass plate set into a healed recess. The owl and book bow entered its keyway exactly. Behind the plate, a cedar-lined cavity held a folded 48-star flag and an oilskin packet. Abigail Clarke's note was dated November 11, 1918, the day the armistice ended the First World War. She had written after learning that Samuel would not return from the Meuse-Argonne. The flag had hung above the paste table while the room filled military hospital orders. Abigail placed it in the walnut because grief needed rest outside the workroom. She instructed Ruth to keep the lining dry and oil the brass each autumn. Ivy refolded the flag on its existing lines, renewed the cedar, and returned the key to the mantel. On August 7, 2024, Purple Heart Day, Ivy carried Edwin's medal to his marker in Spring Grove Cemetery in Florence. She cleaned no tarnish from it. For 1 hour, it rested against the granite beneath a small paper bookplate bearing his name and the year, 1944. Then she returned both objects to the steel box before evening moisture reached the grass. Only 4 coins from the cash were exchanged. They paid for roofing, glass, the corrected record, and Ivy's first Japanese paper. Every expense went onto Marion's preservation receipts. The $33,000 remained untouched with the other coins and Edwin's medal. Ivy wrapped the box in brown paper, sealed it with an owl bookplate, and wrote, "For the next one." Beneath the drying frame, the cedar disc remained visible to anyone taught where to look. The shop reopened without an announcement. Doris pinned 1 index card to the cafe corkboard. Free bookplate practice. Adults leaving foster care. Saturdays, 4 seats. By the next morning, 6 names had been written beneath it. Within 3 months, the mailing list held 43. Some people came once to learn how paste behaved. Others returned until their hands stopped hurrying. Caleb returned in May with a walnut board under his arm. At 21, he had grown into the shoulders once too narrow for the splitting maul. In restrained Roman capitals, he had carved, and daughters. The shallow letters would age with the original sign. "The old board says Clarke works," he said. "This tells the rest." Ivy paid him with the candles Doris had requested. Caleb fixed the board beneath Clarke Bookplate Gumming Works using vertically aligned brass screws. From the lane, it finished a sentence left open for decades. That winter, Ivy began a letter on cream library paper. She tested the nib, waited for the ink to settle, and wrote the opening Marion had left her. My dear one, whoever you are. She addressed it neither to a daughter nor to a named heir, but to the next adult who might arrive with disputed records and nowhere dependable to sleep. She described the well pump, the stove's clean-out, the roof nails, and the precise place where the cedar disc turned. Then she left several pages blank for knowledge she had not yet earned. What was kept carefully could still find its way home. At the clerk's annex, Margaret Ellis never deposited Ivy's dollar. It remained beneath the brass clip in her receipt drawer, beside the parcel number and deed date. Once each winter, she checked that the ink had not transferred, then closed the drawer. Evening light passed through the wavering pane onto Ivy's unfinished letter. The spirit lamp waited beside the wash brush, and blank papers hung above the level table. The paper bookplate gumming room waits. It has always waited.